All right, guys, so here we go. Interpreting slope and y-intercept. So what you have to do when you do this is you have to write the model in context. So please write this into your notes. I think it's going to be helpful. So we're going to go back to, let's go back to the texting example, okay? The texting and text scores. Texting and test scores. Spit it out. Texting and test scores. Okay, so we had this equation that said this. 10 plus 1.2 times x. Okay, so what are we trying to do here? What were we trying to do with this equation? We were trying to predict test scores based on the number of texts sent. That's what we're trying to do, okay? So if I want to write that, if I want to take that, I tried to write in the back of that page, that ain't happening. If I want to write that, then I could do it one of two ways. I could say predicted test score is equal to 10 plus 1.2. Oh, I think it was homework average. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back, okay? 10 plus 1.2 times the homework average, not number of texts, okay? We did two examples. This one's by the homework average, okay? So this model, it tells a story. When you have a least squares regression line, it tells a story. We can say the predicted test score is equal to 10 plus 1.2 times someone's homework average, okay? The other thing we could do is we could say predicted y equals 10 plus 1.2 times x, where y is the predicted test score, and this is the homework average. Either of these is okay. Perfectly correct, okay? But you need all that. You can't have just bits and pieces of it, okay? So we know that this method isn't going to describe things perfectly. It's not going to work every single time, but it's going to give us an idea. It's going to get us in the neighborhood. It's going to kind of tell us sort of what's happening, okay? It's going to give us a really good idea. So to tell the story, we have to really interpret what the slope and the y-intercept is. So let's do this. Let's interpret the y-intercept. Well, in math, you guys probably remember from Algebra 1 or maybe Algebra 2 or whatever, that when you want to find the y-intercept, you plug a 0 in for x. So that's what you do to interpret the y-intercept. Put a 0 in for x, okay? Or put a 0 in for your homework average. Now, sometimes when you interpret the y-intercept, it doesn't make sense, okay? And that's okay, but you still want to interpret it correctly. It might not make practical sense, okay? But you still want to interpret it correctly. So you would say something like this. If I'm going to interpret this, interpret the y-intercept, okay? I'm going to say the model says, I gotta get a thinner marker because this is nuts. I'm going through paper like crazy here. The model says you would have a test score equal to 10 if your homework average was 0, okay? So that is the correct way to interpret that, okay? This is I gotta get a different word. All right, so that's the correct way to interpret that. That's how you interpret the y-intercept, okay? The model says you would have a test score of equal to 0 if your homework average was, I'm sorry, go back again. Model says you would have a test score of 10 if your homework average was 0, okay? Plug a 0 in for x, get an answer for y. All right, so we're back to my old blue pen friend here. We'll try that. Hopefully it's gonna be good enough until I get some thinner markers. Okay, now let's think about slope. Okay, let's think about slope for a minute. So when you think of your slope formula, that's like the change in y over the change in x, or y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, okay? And so for this one, we have 1.2, but we want to talk about slope. You always want to try to put it in a fraction, like a rise over run. So this would be 1.2 over 1. Well, what is it really, though? What's the context? So it's 1.2 test points, okay, because that's your y, right? Your y over your x, and what's x? X is homework points. Okay, just so we can get an idea on this stuff. Okay, so we would say on average, okay, on average, when you think about this situation, the model, what does the model tell us? What's the story that the model tells us? Well, it tells us that on average, okay, the model says that for every 1 point increase in homework average, for every 1 point increase in homework average, your test score goes up by 1.2 points. That is the perfect answer. Okay, that is your perfect answer here. Now, some people, when you're looking at your slope, you could say, well, I made that 12 over 10. And I said for every 10-point increase in homework points, your test grade goes up 12 points. And it's correct if you're talking about algebra, but not in stats. In stats, when we interpret the slope, we want to say for every 1 unit increase in x, what happens to our y? Our y goes up, our y goes down. Okay? If it said this, if it said negative 1.2, then we would make it negative 1.2 over 1. Again, this is still test points, and this is homework points. Now, whenever we do this, we have to start with the bottom. For every 1 point increase in our homework points, our test grade would go down by negative 1.2. Now, I'm glad that's not true, because who would do homework? Who would do homework if that's true? The more homework you do, the poorer test you get. I'm just using this as an example. I took this one and I just made it a negative. Okay, that's all I did. Okay, but that's not what's happening here, but I wanted to tell you how to do that. So I would say for every 1 point increase in my x, for every 1 point increase in my homework points, my test score here, according to this, would go down by 1.2 points. Okay? And just think, there was a time when you guys said in algebra, when are we ever going to use this? Well, here you go, baby. This is when you're going to use it. All right? So when you are interpreting the slope, this is how it always goes. For every 1, and then I don't know, 1 unit increase. Okay, I'm going to write unit increase in the x. Okay, the x variable, whatever that is. Okay, your y variable goes up or down by blank. Okay, this is always going to work. Man, what is with the phone today? Okay, for every 1 unit increase, okay, for here, 1 point increase, 1 homework point increase, okay, or 1 point increase in homework average, your test score goes up or down by what? Okay, so here is the writing it in context. Okay, important. Okay, important. We're going to do that. We're going to do it. All right.